Hello Humble Nation, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to do a review on episode 1 of season 8 of Game of Thrones. And what can I say about the episode except that it was a nice start to the final season, and it really showed you where the season is going to be going as a whole, as most, if not all, the major characters are amassing at Winterfell for what appears to be a huge battle between the army of the living and the army of the dead. So the episode opens up in Winterfell with the procession of troops and the massive army that Daenerys has brought to Winterfell, and you have a crowd of Northerners gathered outside of Winterfell waiting to greet them. Reluctantly, because I mean, Northerners, they don't like strangers, so certainly seeing all these strange folk coming into their territories doesn't necessarily, set easy with them. So the first thing you see is a small boy trying to fight his way through the crowd as he excitedly wants to get his first glimpse at these new people, specifically at Daenerys Targaryen and Jon Snow as they make their approach. So he can't quite get through. Arya is actually out there, not inside Winterfell with the rest of the most important people. So she's actually out in the front gate, and she sees the boy trying to get through. So she actually kind of moves aside so that he can kind of get a better look. And he ends up climbing up a tree. And it's at that moment that you truly see the army of first the Unsullied and then the Dothraki proceed into Winterfell. And then you see Jon Snow and Daenerys. And Daenerys is wearing a nice white coat, and Jon is wearing his normal wolf coat. And as they approach, they are greeted by Sansa and Bran, as well as some of the other high-ranking members of the North. And after Jon and Dany, you have Tyrion and Lord Varys riding in a wagon, and you also have and you also have the Hound as well, which Arya is not too pleased to see him, obviously. So once they make it into the gates, obviously Bran is the first person that Jon sees, and he immediately runs over to Bran and embraces him, and he tells Bran that you're a man now. And Bran looks at him as the three-eyed raven would and says, "Not yet." He tells him, "No, I'm not quite yet a man." But he's not really a man because he's not really human because of the whole three-eyed raven thing, And so then Jon introduces Dany to Sansa, the Lady of Winterfell, and Sansa and Dany, well, you can tell right away that there's friction there and that there's a little bit of a distrust, certainly on Sansa's part. Dany tries to be hospitable, saying, that the North is as beautiful as your brother said, and so are you. But ultimately, Sansa looks at Daenerys and says, "Winterfell is yours, Your Grace." And then, chaos sort of ensues as different members of different houses of the North all start to argue with Jon and say, "Well, we made you king of the North." Specifically, Lyanna Mormont, she stands up and says, "You, Jon Snow, were the king of the North. We are not here to bow to, this Targaryen, this southern person who has come up here to the North, this foreigner. We're not here to bow to her. We named you king." And Jon says that he had to choose between his crown and the North, and he chose the North. So he gave up his crown, bent the knee to Daenerys, because he knew that without her armies, without her resources, they were doomed. The army of the dead would wash over them and kill them all. So then after that, you have Bran telling, oh, before that, Bran kind of interrupts him in the courtyard, and he's like, we don't have time for this. We don't have time for these hostilities. Okay, Dany, your dragon that died, you know, the Night King rose him. So he has your dragon now, and he's marching this way. So we're running out of time. Let's just kind of get along and, you know, prepare for battle, basically. So then you have some other meetings. Later on, you have the reunion between Arya and Jon. Remember, Arya was not in the main courtyard of Winterfell when they arrived. She was out in the crowd outside. So later on, Arya meets Jon near the tree, the big famous Stark tree where they go and they pray. And you know, they embrace. You can tell they still love each other. And Arya tells Jon, you know, we are family. Don't forget that. Ultimately, you know, no matter what, we are family. Which is kind of ironic because they are family, but at the same time, they're not family in the way that they believe themselves to be family. Okay, now you also have Tyrion and Sansa's reunion, the joyous husband and wife, not so much. And in other circumstances, Sansa probably would have greeted Tyrion more warmly. But Tyrion is there as the hand of the queen, the hand of the foreign queen, Daenerys Targaryen. And he is also there under this hope that Cersei, his sister, will send her army to assist them in their battle with the White Walkers. Sansa tells him that he's a fool, and says that, I used to think you were the cleverest man alive. And then she leaves. Then they go to King's Landing. Well, in King's Landing, Cersei gets the news the White Walkers have broken through the wall, and she couldn't be more happy. You know, this is what she wanted. You know, she wants the White Walkers to attack her enemies in the north. You know, they've all amassed there, and she wants them all to wipe each other out, so that she's basically the one left standing, and she's there on her Iron Throne, and she doesn't have to worry about being challenged. Well, we'll see if she gets her wish, obviously. Well, after that, we fast forward to the throne room, where she is meeting with Greyjoy, who has brought with him the Golden Company, led by Captain Strickland. And Golden Company, of course, is a huge, legendary type of army from a foreign land. And Cersei is disappointed because there are no elephants, and she was told there would be elephants. But apparently the voyage by sea was not safe for the elephants, so they're not there. So get over it, Sansa. No, Sansa. Cersei. Get over it, Cersei. The elephants are not there. Okay? Meanwhile, Euron Greyjoy, all he seems to care about is bedding the queen. So, reluctantly, she grants his wish, and, you know, da-da-da-da-da-da. Not all that important, really. And so then, then we have Theon. Okay, so while Euron is in King's Landing romancing the queen, Theon decides to make his move. And him and his men from the Iron Isles, who remain loyal to him and his sister, they attack the ships, take out Euron's men, and they rescue. Theon rescues his sister. They embrace, they talk for a few minutes. She talks about going back and taking the Iron Isles now that their uncle is busy in King's Landing. Theon likes that idea, but his heart truly wants to go to Winterfell and help the Starks defend their homeland and sort of try to redeem himself as well. I mean, he certainly knows that he may die in the process and they may never see each other again. But, you know, his sister respects his wishes and they part. Now we're going back to Winterfell, and Tyrion and Davros and Varys are talking, and Davros is talking about how he's been there a little while and the North is stubborn. You know, they're not just going to warm up to you because you came here with all this pomp and all this army. Oh, and 2 dragons, which, you know, were obviously pretty fear and awe invoking. if you want them to trust you, you got to earn that trust. And he goes, what better way to earn that trust than by basically pairing up Jon and Dany? Instead of having just one ruler of the 7 kingdoms, why not have a just woman and an honorable man on the throne? And as they're saying that, they show Jon and Dany, and you kind of get this kind of foreboding that maybe perhaps they're not going to both live to see the end of this. Well, maybe they will. It's hard to know. And obviously there's still that whole truth of Jon Snow's true parentage that hasn't quite been revealed yet. Now, Dany finds out the dragons are low on food. She doesn't think they're eating enough, so her and Jon go out to see if the dragons are doing well. Dany mounts her dragon, and Jon reluctantly stands there. Dany tells him to, kind of eggs him on. And Jon goes, well, I don't know how to ride a dragon. And Dany goes, no one knows how to ride a dragon until they ride a dragon. And then he goes, well, what if he doesn't like me? And Dany goes, well, it was nice knowing you, Jon Snow. Well, long story short, Jon, because he is a Targaryen, secretly, right, rides the dragon. The dragon likes him. The dragon bonds with him, seems to bond with him. And the two of them have a short little jaunt through the mountains. Jon takes her to his favorite hunting ground, which has these beautiful cascading waterfalls. And there they kind of talk about how they could stay there for, 1,000 years and nobody would even know that they were there. And the first thing Jon says to her when he gets off the dragon is, you've completely ruined horses for me. And then he says to Dany, it's cold up here for a southern girl. And Dany says, so keep your queen warm. They embrace, and then they start kissing, and the dragons look on kind of awkwardly. Pretty awkward scene in my opinion. But then they go back to Winterfell, where Gendry, our only surviving son of Robert Baratheon, is making blades and weapons with dragon glass. He's made the Hound a new axe. And then Arya walks in, and the Hound looks at Arya and says, you left me for dead. And Arya says, first I robbed you. And the Hound said, well, you are a cold bitch, aren't you? But I guess that's why you're still alive. And he leaves. And then Arya and Gendry kind of start this banter in this conversation, and they're kind of a teasing, involved, and it's almost as if, they kind of like each other in a romantic sense. But Arya basically is all business at first. She wants Gendry to craft her some kind of weapon from dragon glass, or it's some kind of a blade or a spear, but it has a retractable blade to it. And I'm pretty sure that that's obviously going to be significant at some point in the season, but we'll have to wait and find out exactly how it's going to tie into this whole thing. Well, then you have Lady Sansa and Jon again, and she's chastising him once again for bringing this foreigner in to Winterfell, but mostly for bending the knee, for giving up his crown and bending the knee. And Jon tells her, who holds what title is not what matters. There's an army of the dead coming, and they don't care who holds what title. So Jon's seeing the bigger picture here, but Sansa is still tied up in this whole, I don't want her here, I don't want them here. This is our home. Yes, it's your home, Sansa, but Jon is trying to save it. He's trying to save it. There's not going to be a home to save if you don't allow him to do what he needs to do. He knows what he's talking about. The Northerners made him king for a reason. You supported him as king of the North for a reason. So trust him. Know that he knows what is best. And then Sansa asked him one final question. Did you bend the knee because of the North, or because you love her? And we never get to see John give an answer, because it fades away and goes to the next scene, where we see Sir Jorah and Dany approaching Samuel Tarly, Maester in training or such. And if you remember, back at last season, Samwell saved Sir Jorah from the grayscale. An unprecedented feat. So Dany has come to thank him for that, and to find out what he needs and what she can do for him. Well, he starts talking about needing pardons for stealing some books from the Citadel, and for stealing a Valyrian steel sword from his father. And it's then that Dany remembers his disobedient father, and she tells Samwell, your father refused to bend the knee, and so he died. Samwell's taken aback and distraught, but at the same time, it is his father, and he had a strained relationship with his father. So he's like, well, at least I can go back now that my brother is Lord. Well, your brother stood with your father, so he died too. And it's then that Samwell pretty much breaks down and says that he needs to be alone. Well, he wanders back out into the courtyard, where he finds Bran waiting. And he asks Bran what he's doing there, and Bran says, I'm waiting for an old friend. Well, we'll get back to that old friend later. But he turns to Samwell and he says, it is time to tell Jon the truth. Samwell thinks Bran should tell him because, well, you're the three-eyed raven and you're his brother. And Bran goes, well, no, you're more of a brother to him than I ever will be, and I'm not really his brother. So Samwell goes to find Jon, and he finds him in the crypts, where Jon is sort of just reminiscing and remembering. And Jon starts talking about how he gave up his crown and he's no longer king, and Sam goes, that's not true. You have always been king. And Jon's like, what are you talking about? And he says, you've never been a bastard. Your mother was Lyanna Stark, and your father was Rhaegar Targaryen. And you are Aegon Targaryen, heir to the Iron Throne. And Jon, with a little bit of knowing in his eyes, immediately shuns this idea by saying that his father, Ned Stark, was the most honorable man he ever knew and would not have lied to him. But Samwell retracts that and says, well, he lied to you to protect you because he promised your mother that he would do everything in his power to protect you. But you are the true heir to the Iron Throne. Then they talk about having to tell Dany, and Jon doesn't know how he's going to necessarily do that. And Samwell says, well, you gave up your crown for your people. Would Dany do the same? Then we go to the wall. Well, not really the wall, the last hearth, which is where the Ember, where Ned Amber, the Ember boy who's taken over for his father, where his family or his house is centered, the last hearth. It's the most northern point past the wall. And here we see Thormund, the Giant's Bane, Beric, and Ed, who of course leads the Night's Watch. Well, they are trying to frantically search around and see if there's anybody there at the last hearth. As they enter one of the main rooms, they see Ned Ember body impaled to a wall, surrounded by various body parts, making some kind of a ancient White Walker symbol or something of that nature. Just as they're about to back away, Ned Amber comes to life. He is a white. And he tries to attack them. Well, Beric, using his flaming sword, lights the boy on fire. And the whole symbol goes up. And it reflects, it almost looks like the Targaryen symbol in a way, but not really quite sure what its meaning is at this point. But we've seen various symbols like this throughout the series, including in the very first episode of the series, when you see a bunch of dead bodies, and at one point Mance Rayder and Jon Snow see a bunch of dead horses that are forming some kind of a symbol of sorts. Okay. Well, then we're back to our. So Thormund says, the three of them agree that they need to ride out. If they ride out on horses, they can get ahead of the Night King's army. They can go to Winterfell and they can warn them, hey, you got to be ready because they're coming now. Well, then they go back to Winterfell for one last time in this episode, and a strange cloaked figure arrives via horseback, comes through the gate unnoticed, parks his horse, gets off, and uncloaks. And as he uncloaks, he's revealed to be Jaime Lannister himself. Now, if you remember at the end of the last season, Jaime told his sister, I'm going to go and fight for the living. You may not be giving me the Lannister army, but I'm still going. You can't stop me from going. So he's obviously done what he told Cersei he was going to do. He's marched to Winterfell, and he is now in Winterfell, supposedly to fight. But just as he gets off his horse and he uncloaks himself, he looks across the courtyard and he locks eyes with Bran. So this is obviously the old friend that Bran was talking about earlier with Samwell. And that concludes the episode. Now, as we look forward to next week's episode, and 3 burning questions from the preview for the next episode that we saw. The first burning question is, what will happen to Jaime Lannister? Because we now see him facing Daenerys Targaryen, the Kingslayer, facing Daenerys. This is the man that killed her father. So what will she do to him? What will happen there? Will she just say, okay, we'll deal with this later after the fight, or will she do something pretty rash right now? Who knows? Let's hope that Jaime lives at least to see the battle. Number 2, we see Arya pretty bloodied, running through the tunnels. It appears the tunnels under Winterfell, the crypts. What is she running from, or why is she running? It would take a lot to make Arya run. Arya is one of the bravest characters on this show, so whatever she's running from, I'm not quite sure it's good. And the third big question is, will anyone else find out about Jon Snow or Jon Targaryen or Aegon Targaryen, about his true parentage before the big battle occurs, which we're assuming is going to be in episode 3, the battle for Winterfell. So in the next episode, will anybody else find out about Jon's true parentage, or is it going to have to wait till later after the battle? And we'll talk about that next week, and we'll see if any of these questions or all of these questions are answered in the next episode, episode 2, which airs next Sunday at 9 p.m. on HBO. Thanks for joining me, and if you liked what you saw, give me a thumbs up. Comment down below, let me know who your favorite Game of Thrones characters are, and what you want to see or what you predict will happen by the end of the series, which is now only 5 episodes away. So, see y'all next week. Subscribe, click that notification bell, and have a good